I'm here to share with you how does the work of the United Nations, particularly the new Sustainable Development Goals and the upcoming climate change, relate to today's theme on rebuilding the shrine of human living. And for me, it is interesting that Alice Bailey refers to rebuilding the shrine of human living in the book Destiny of Nations, because this concept includes not only our individual actions, but also embraces our collective actions, which then translate into the consciousness of nations. So it's much more of a bigger plan than the individual part. And if you lived in New York, you probably noticed all the commotion that happened during the weekend of Friday, September 25th to Sunday, September 27th. Pope Francis was in the city. Among the many sites he visited, he joined us in the United Nations General Assembly, where he addressed that was celebrating the 70th anniversary of the United Nations. The Pope spoke about the common home for men and women and of universal fraternity. These are words that resonate today more than ever. And Pope Francis reminded leaders of the founding purpose of the United Nations, which is saving succeeding generations from the scourge of war and promoting social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. These are in fact the very principles boldly proclaimed in the preamble of the UN Charter. The Pope, however, also reminded the August Forum without strong ethics and the judicious use of power, the Charter can only be an unattainable illusion, or even worse, idle chatter, which serves as a cover for all kinds of abuses and corruption. After the Pope's address, the Community of Nations gathered to adopt a new charter, described in its declaration as a charter for people and planet in the 21st century. This document is titled Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which contains the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. How many of you have read the goals, the global goals? Okay, great. And in the declaration, there are 5 key elements, which are peace, partnerships, people, planet, and prosperity. The 2030 Agenda sets a new paradigm. First, the fundamental aspects of development, economic, social, and environment, are now integrated. They no longer stand each in its own silo, but the trade-offs between economic growth, social progress, and environmental protection have been carefully reviewed and will operate under the new thinking that economic growth can be achieved with social inclusion and with environmental integrity. So the Sustainable Development Goals, rather than being the 8 silos that we had in the Millennium Development Goals, they are a network of relationships. It's a weaving. If a country starts to implement Goal 1, which is to end poverty, by its very nature, they will implement at least 5 other goals, because it is a connected web. Second, it's universally applicable. All countries from north and south are committed to implementing it. This is, for me, perhaps the biggest shift. All those involved in creating the goals understood the butterfly effect. If the butterfly flaps its wings in New York, it is felt in India, Bangladesh, Vietnam. Decisions taken in one part of the world affect the other parts of the world. Climate change, sustainable consumption and production, inequality, the root causes of poverty, cannot be addressed if industrialized world does not change. For aspirants living in communities of wealth, this is a very important opportunity to implement these goals without having to leave their own community to be in service. For advanced nations, which sole role was to be a donor in the MDGs, this is a very big paradigm shift. Now they need to look inward and put their house in order. And they will also be responsible to implement this agenda at home. For the United States, perhaps one of the most difficult goals is Goal 12, which is changing its unsustainable patterns of consumption and production. This requires deep changes in all our lifestyles. The implementation of the global goals are a call for action not only in the grand national sense, but also in our own individual capacity, in the way we live, we breathe, we eat, and we relate to each other. And third, the definition of development now includes issues that had previously remained outside, particularly peace and security and climate change. Separate communities now have the mandate to work together. The spirit of partnership is imbued in this agenda. The climate community, which has always stand aloof, away from the locus of the organization, has now been integrated in Goal 13, which is the standalone goal on climate change. Most importantly, the peace and security community now is also encouraged to work with social and environmental communities. Here, the United Nations has the big challenge to redefine its work. The Security Council hardly works together with the General Assembly, the ECOSOC, the peace-building community. All of them work in separate compartments with very little synergies and very little impact between each other, even if they are in the same building. The unifying call of the 2030 Agenda is trying to break the silo so entrenched in our thinking, in our attitude, and in the bad habits of this wonderful world organization. It is reflecting the shift from Pisces, the Pisces age, to the Aquarius age. One of the examples is Goal 5, which is the empowerment of women. If you see, the empowerment of women has been compartmentalized in the Security Council with the resolution on women, peace, and security. Here, the Security Council only evaluates women's needs in terms of conflict. Peace has been understood as an absence of conflict and not peace in larger freedom. But Goal 5 includes ending all forms of violence for women and girls, ending all forms of discrimination for women and girls, but also includes women as mothers, women as part of the economic force, women in leadership roles. So it includes women's empowerment in a much bigger, much greater role than just these specific aspects. And for the fourth shift is civil society engagement. The 2 years that the SDGs were developed, the Secretary General mentioned that over 8 million people engaged in this agenda. Civil society also didn't leave the room. The SDGs were the SDGs being developed. The often closed doors that have characterized negotiations in the UN did not really happen in this process. So it was not only men in suits. And the other two things that perhaps are not shifts, but I think they're more like mantras, is that this idea of leaving no one behind and reaching those that are the farthest away, meaning that the new agenda cannot hide behind averages. Right now in the MDGs, there's still 57 countries that we don't really know where they are. So this agenda calls for a data revolution. A bigger sense of pragmatism needs to be really imbued in this agenda, because the MDGs in a way were largely achieved because of great progress in China and India. But sub-Saharan Africa still remains with big challenges in the MDGs framework. So reaching those that are the farthest and leaving no one behind becomes really two very important tenets if we really want to achieve the 2030 agenda. Turning briefly to another world event this year is climate change. By the end of 2015, the world expects a new climate agreement. Despite the slow progress in negotiations, the architecture of the new climate regime is being outlined. Like the 2030 agenda, the Paris Agreement is also universal. The firewall between developed and developing countries has transformed into a more circular, less defensive shape. All countries have decided to act. Over 160 countries have already submitted their climate action plans. The same principle of universal action is reflected here. Also, in the climate change world, they're talking about goals. A top priority of the agenda is the need to define an ambitious long-term goal of emission reductions at the global level. This means that the Paris Agreement will hopefully contain a commitment to reduce to zero emissions by 2050 at the latest. The Paris Conference also needs to deliver a strong climate finance package. For us, this means that financial flows need to be redistributed and aligned with these new agendas. Also, what does climate change mean more symbolically? I guess for me, it means the planet is asking us to evaluate how we use and spend our energy, to reevaluate our priorities in life and our relationship with the planet. This agenda is as much a world agenda as a personal quest of transformation. By 2016, the UN will have the opportunity and the challenge to operate under the most comprehensive framework on sustainable development in its history. This means individuals, all of us who love the United Nations, are in touch with its work, will be required to be more vigilant and to remind ourselves of these shifts. It means that this is part of the plan. Every time when we pray and say the great invocation, we end by saying, "Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth." The 2030 Agenda may very well be a small manifestation of this great master plan. For example, Judy's presentation reminded me of Goal 4, which is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality of education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. All of us doing important work in many fields can find itself, I assure you, you will find yourself either in a goal or in one of the 169 targets in the SDGs. So the SDGs become a bridge for world aspirants to contact and connect with the heart of the UN, which now contains the 2030 Agenda. And to conclude, I need to speak a little bit about what it has meant to be for me to rebuild the shrine of human living. As someone involved in these negotiations and being most of the time involved outwardly, for me it has meant turning inwards, dedicating some time to build a shrine inside myself, to strengthen and listen to the voice of silence, to clean and evaluate my habits, to integrate my three bodies and confront several of my fears. For you, it may be entirely different. It may be even the opposite, perhaps being more outside in the world and less inside. Wherever we are, rebuilding the shrine of human living means being able to sustain the new energies that are coming and being able to spread them. Thank you.